to the February 17th edition of the Global News Review. I'm Patrick Ryan, President of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and I am here today with Ambassador Dick Bowers and Dr. Breck Walker. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Breck,
hello, Pat. How are you?
Good to see you. Hopefully you're staying warm and toasty out of the ice and snow and the more to come later today.
Are you in Florida, Breck?
I am. I'm in Florida, and the temperature is in the mid-30s, and it feels like a heat wave compared to what you all are going through.
Yeah, it's getting nippy. We're supposed to have some more snow this afternoon and this evening, so we'll see what happens.
And then cover that with some more ice.
Yeah. So what we need is just keep the power on. That's the main goal.
So in 4 months, when people are watching the archive version of this Global News Review, they'll think back to February and our Nashville storm. But I guess it's nothing in comparison to what's going on in Texas.
Yeah,
and
Texas.
Breck, you've got family.
Kin
there?
live in Texas, and they've been out without power. In Houston, they've been out no power for 2 days so far.
Well, and
still no power
and no power, and having to boil the water. The water system is not filtering as it should.
Wow. So you had a scarf on, Pat. You took your scarf on.
Well, maybe we'll get to that later on, but let's jump into a couple things. Let me mention to our friends that we've adjusted our registration process. So no longer will you have to go through Eventbrite. That seemed to present some obstacles. So now it's a direct link to Zoom. I'll just mention that we did have our registration system through Eventbrite to give you the option of becoming a member of the World Affairs Council or making a donation when you signed up for our programs. But since Eventbrite presented some obstacles, you go direct to Zoom. But please keep in mind that we would like you to become a member of the World Affairs Council. And if you're able to make a gift to the council, you can go to our website, tnwac.org/donate. And $5 a month to enjoy the programming we bring and what we do for the community, education outreach and so forth. And let me thank Sally Smallwood, who registered today as a member. And I think Sally is with us in the audience today. So thank you, Sally, for becoming a member of the World Affairs Council. I'd like to bring up a couple of calendar items. We've just added our Spring International Career Panel for March 23rd. And this will be on the theme of women in international law. Professor Susan Haynes, a member of our board, is putting together a terrific panel of international legal professionals from around the world. So the start time of this program will be 1:30 p.m. Central Time to allow for participants on the panel who hail from such places as London, Paris, Beirut, Cambodia, and some other lawyers who will be checking in. So you have an opportunity, if you are interested in women's role in the legal profession, women who are accomplished, serving in positions in the judiciary in different countries and as attorneys, you don't want to miss that. So that's Women in International Law, our international career panel. We are dovetailing that with a panel on diplomacy. We'll be talking with diplomat in residence Alan DeBose, who will talk about the U.S. Foreign Service and jobs at the U.S. State Department. And that will be 2 days later, March 25th, at our regular time for career panels at 5:30 p.m. So just keep up with our newsletter and calendar, and you'll see those things on there. And don't forget, next week on February 25th, we'll be hosting a conversation with Kelsey Davenport, who is the Director of Non-Proliferation at the Arms Control Administration. And we'll be talking about the Iran nuclear deal and the timeline for getting something done on returning to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or as Ambassador Bowers is fond of saying, the JICPOA. And there's a clock running on that. So Kelsey Davenport will be here to talk about that. So that's February 25th. Look for that on our calendar as well. Okay, Dick, over to you, and we'll let you talk about the topics today.
All right, we're going to do our normal 3 topics. So first comes with early obstacles for Biden's foreign policy. So the president's off to a running start, and how's he doing? Secondly, France and the Sahel. And Sahel is a large swatch of Africa, and there's stuff going on there that's kind of critical in the long run. And finally, the World Trade Organization gets a new face. The first time an African and the first time a woman has become the head of the WTO.
Interesting developments in these international organizations, and we're happy to talk about them so people, you wouldn't see these normally in the news every day, but these are important events, the events in Africa and also what's going on in the World Trade Organization. Breck, do you want to give us the question of the week?
I will, Pat. The question of the week, we'll give the answer at the end of the program, but the question of the week is, the leader of this country, head of the nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, which henceforth I'll just call the BJP, this leader has pushed to change school curricula to downplay the country's secular roots, which reflect the country's founders' goal to promote peace between the majority Hindus and the sizable Muslim minority and other religious communities. Is the answer A, Pakistan, B, India, C, Bangladesh, or D, Uzbekistan? And again, the answer at the end of the program. Pat, thanks.
All right, great. Well, let's jump right into our first topic, and we're going to talk about the Biden administration. We talked about foreign policy in general in the Biden administration in the past couple of our global news reviews, but today we're going to talk specifically about some of the obstacles to what's going on in foreign policy in the administration. And Breck, I think you've got the lead on this, so over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Well, Pat and Dick, the three of us, I think, on this program through the past several months have been consistently critical of the Trump administration foreign policy, with a few exceptions here and there. And, we all three have welcomed Biden's election with big smiles and open arms because we see it as the return of professionals to the State Department, the Defense Department, and the intelligence agencies. So it's probably a good time to discuss just how difficult it is going to be for the Biden team to achieve success on any meaningful scale. And there are two articles that have just come out that touch on that topic that I think we all thought would be good to highlight. One is an article from this past Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal by Walter Russell Mead. Walter Russell Mead is a well-known foreign policy academic that used to teach at Yale, currently is teaching at Bard College, has published a lot of books, and he wrote an article, a column titled Biden's Rough Start with the World. And Dr. Mead suggests that the Biden administration may find itself unable to make much progress on its key objectives. Many of those objectives, of course, are the polar opposite of where the Trump administration was trying to take us. So let's take just one of Mead's examples, which is Biden's hope to improve relations with Europe. Now, clearly, and we've talked about this, the Biden administration will strike a much more collaborative tone than the Trump administration did. The Biden administration will emphasize the importance of resetting relations with the EU, making it clear that the U.S. is 100% committed to NATO, and urging a joint approach with Europe on a whole host of issues, not the least of which would be climate change. But Mead points out that even before Trump, Europe had been tiring of America's hectoring moralism and big brother attitude of knowing more than anyone else. Very recently, French President Emmanuel Macron criticized the, quote, wokeness of American cultural life and said that importing those attitudes into France would be a threat to the French way of life. And Pierre Trudeau of Canada has said similar things recently. Now, the Europeans, way back since the day of Ostpolitik under Brandt, have consistently adopted very pragmatic positions in prioritizing economic relations with Russia and China, and will undoubtedly oppose any substantive Biden administration efforts to use pervasive economic sanctions to punish human rights abuses in China or Russia. And then also very recently, in the last week, the U.S. Trade Representative's office announced that Trump's tariffs on European food products, such as wine and cheese, will be around for a while, And Biden has recently spoke about embarking on a Buy America program to promote jobs in the United States, all of which is going to leave Europeans wary of U.S. trade policy going forward. So Mead says this group hug that Biden hopes for with Europe may be a ways off. And similar trends can probably be expected in Asia, where, for example, India and Japan do not seem to be following the American lead to isolate and sanction the military government in Myanmar, because they have important economic interest at risk. So Mead's conclusion is this, and I'll quote this part from Mead. The Biden administration has an ambitious agenda, and many allies prefer a quiescent U.S. to an activist one. Now, his metaphor, I love this metaphor. Mead's metaphor, is a restaurant menu at the Uncle Sam's World Order Cafe. Mead writes, quote, some of its customers would order a double helping of security protection with a side of development assistance, but hold the human rights. Some would want no security at all, merely the house salad of mixed green policies with a nice light dressing of human rights on the side, close quote. So Mead may be suggesting that to be successful, the Biden administration must make multilateralism more than a slogan. They can't be a leader in every instance. They have to listen to our allies, which of course reminds me of the quote widely attributed to Martin Luther King for one, but slightly modified by me here. There go my allies, I must follow them, for I am their leader. The second article is by Jessica Matthews in the magazine Foreign Affairs. Her article is entitled Present at the Recreation. I love that title. So she argues that Joe Biden's message has been Trump's approach to foreign policy is absolutely an aberration, and under Joe Biden's leadership, we will be back to the head of the table. But Jessica Matthews argues that returning to the pre-Trump status quo, though, is not in all likelihood going to be possible. And she says that because when folks outside the U.S. look at what American leadership has looked like over the last 20 years, well, it's not good. You can start with the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the destabilization of the Middle East that follows. You can talk about the 2008 financial crisis that began in the United States and spread throughout the world. You can talk about our failures to end the war in Afghanistan and to build a diverse, more democratic government in Afghanistan. You can talk about our incoherent policy in Syria, and you can talk about our inability to forestall or counter Russian and Chinese aggression. You can talk about our poor handling of the COVID pandemic. You can talk about a political system that is not working and is subject to breathtaking shifts in policy. So the allies would say, what's to trust here? Why should we follow, much less listen? Where is the track record that's impressive that the United States has laid out for us in a recent historical sense? So what Biden regularly calls the power of our example is nothing like what it used to be, or so says Jessica Matthews. Her message is, it's a long way back for America and American diplomacy to regain, a favored and trusted role in the wider world, even among our allies. And while the Trump administration was a setback in many respects, she would argue the obstacles we have created for ourselves and that the Biden administration must face go back well before Trump. So her main points are three through the rest of the article, and I'll be very quick on this. Now, first, she says Biden will make two overarching changes to the foreign policy of Trump, and we've talked about this. He will try to rebuild close relationships with allies and friends, and he'll re-engage in the process of multilateral problem solving, but it'll be interesting to see what the Biden administration means by multilateral. Second, Jessica Matthews says the biggest near-term risk from a foreign policy perspective she sees is the unraveling of the one China policy, which is a policy that's been there since the days of Nixon, and which is purposefully a policy of ambiguity based on the polite fiction that China and Taiwan are one country that at some point will reunite peacefully. And Jessica Matthews argues that it's not inconceivable that war between the United States and China is a possibility given recent trends. And lastly, she says the biggest quandary, the last point she makes is what she calls the biggest quandary for the Biden administration foreign policy. And that is, at its heart, the Biden administration is all about United States exerting leadership on a broad range of global issues. It will be an administration that is very much reform-minded on a global scale, more idealistic, more pro-democracy, more pro-human rights, and quick to criticize and sanction authoritarian tendencies in other governments. And yet, Matthews argues this approach will increasingly divide the world into two camps that we already see today, the Democratic camp and the authoritarian camp. And this division, exacerbated by the Biden administration, perhaps, will impede solving pressing global problems that Biden wants prioritized, because those problems, like climate change, like nuclear proliferation, like dealing with future pandemics, requires the participation of the entire world, not just the democracies or not just those countries we have good relations with. So Matthews concludes that we should keep in mind that we need to be thoughtful about how we judge Biden's foreign policy going forward. If the U.S. under his watch, quote, can develop a strategically sound relationship with China, reassert itself in relations with Russia, pursue economic policies that see international economic growth as a win-win and not a zero-sum game, and recapture the confidence of allies and friends, it will have done more than enough to be proud of, close quote, even if some of his broader objectives are more slow going. So Pat, those two interesting articles in the past week.
Breck, that's terrific. Thanks for bringing us those insights. It's certainly worth considering as we analyze what's unfolding in the Biden administration foreign policy. I'm interested, though, in hearing more about what Mr. Macron has to say about wokeness. It would seem to me that he would appreciate the United States coming around to support of the Paris Accord on climate, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'll have to dig into that.
Pat, I think the wokeness he's referring to is the, by U.S. standards, I think it's fair to say the relatively hard line he's taking with the Islamic presence in France and what it's doing, what he would say it's doing to French culture.
Right. Well,
not
today we saw.
Accord.
Yeah, today we saw in the news that the French legislature, the lower body, just passed a very aggressive law on promoting secular society and prohibiting extremist groups. And people believe that that's aimed specifically at the Muslim community in France, because we can all recall the various attacks and things that they've suffered there.
Right.
And Macron is up for re-election next year against probably Marine Le Pen, the hard right candidate. So he's probably trying to shore up his more stringent credentials against that, but also the concern about what's been happening there. Dick, what's your take on what Biden and company have in front of them in terms of, in the run up to the election, everybody said, well, if Biden is back in, it's going to be transatlantic hugs and kisses. But now we see Germany and others making trade deals with China and openly talking about the United States leadership in that area, and others being as Breck has positioned today, not necessarily something that they're ready for the hectoring moralism to prevail.
Well, first, I think Breck did an excellent job. I mean, the reality is that the world is the way it is, and we have to deal with it as we find it. We need to think about where we are trying to go with our foreign policy and what we want to do. But I'm a hardcore believer that foreign policy starts at home, and we have to get our act together in America. What do we stand for? What do we want from the world? How much internationalism do we want? I don't get the feel that there are a lot of countries that think we're the hectoring, interfering, moralistic person they don't want to deal with. There are some, of course, and especially there are adversaries like Russia and China. But the world needs leadership, and most of the problems that we're really going to be facing in the upcoming decades are multilateral international problems, and they can't be solved by one nation alone. So my sense is that Mr. Biden is going to engage in the world. He's got an uphill battle to push that rock up the hill. But I think that engaging is the thing to do. The United States cannot and should not try to live as an isolationist nation.
Yeah, and Matthews leaves her her argument with the notion that we need to rebuild at home before we can hector abroad.
Amen.
Breck, and anything more on Mr. Biden going forward? Anything that you've seen so far that you like or are concerned about?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think that both articles, my impression was at least that both articles were not being critical of Biden's policies. They were being, in their minds, realistic about how difficult it's going to be for those policies to achieve a great deal of success certainly in his first term, because there are obstacles that Trump created, but there are also obstacles that United States foreign policies through past administrations, all the way back to the Clinton administration, probably, that has tarnished America's reputation in the wider world for leadership qualities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but sure. It really, the whole thing about the foreign policy and the relationships, it's relationships. One of the things that Biden has going for him, he has been in the game of foreign affairs for decades, and he knows a lot of these people and they know him. So the idea that, he'd pick up the phone and talk to Xi Jinping for 2 hours, that's basically unprecedented in my experience, where one leader talks to another for 2 hours, unless they're sitting across a table like Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev or something of that sort. So Biden will personally engage on all these things, and he's got a team that he's put in place that are really internationalists and that know what they're doing. I cannot imagine that Mr. Trump would have spent 2 hours on a phone call with anyone, unless it's really Giuliani.
Well, good point.
Anyway.
Well, you're right. I think Biden is a well-known commodity around the world and can pick up the phone and talk to people. We had a picture in the opening slide there of him with Nouri al-Maliki. So I mean, he's spent a lot of time in the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. And at least when he was with al-Maliki in Baghdad, he didn't get a shoe thrown at him. So he's got that going for him. Let me mention, talking about Jessica Matthews, we had the great pleasure of having a conversation with Dr. Matthews last fall, October 15th, as you can see in the slide there, as part of our election 2020 coverage. And with Dr. Matthews was General John Allen. He's the head of Brookings, and she was the longtime president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And they talked to us with our very own Dr. Tom Schwartz from Vanderbilt about America's place in the world. And I'll just recommend that our viewers take a look at the rich library we have on our youtube.com/TNWAC YouTube channel. It is rich with material like this conversation we had with Jessica Matthews and John Allen, and the selection of 12 other election 2020 programs. So take advantage of this collection of good insights and perspectives on what's going on in the world. Just because it aired live last October doesn't mean there's enduring value to these longtime professionals' views of what's going on in the world. Okay, anything more, gentlemen, on the U.S. Foreign policy and the obstacles facing Mr. Biden going forward?
Well, I just throw out one, one of the things, on the one hand, there is a pretty well-known list of things that we need to do, and then things we're trying to do and how to engage the world. There's also some kind of a black swan event. Other things are going to happen out there. Yeah. And to be prepared to deal with them, I think is very important from the United States' ability to lead in the world. But I don't get the sense that the world wants the United States to continue to be as it was under the Trump administration.
No, I think the common position is that going forward, the foreign policy will have some of the characteristics of the good old days, but it's going to have to be forward-looking and taking on a new character.
The world as it is today, not as it was 20 years ago or 50.
And we have to be mindful that Joe Biden has said that his top priorities are the pandemic, the economy, looking at the problems of polarization in the country, and peace and justice, and looking at how people are treated around the country. So on that list, foreign policy is in 5th place, although that's not as if the foreign policy team, the national security team, isn't working hard to put a marker out there in places like Iran with the nuclear policy. We talked about the clock ticking on that. Just today, it was announced that President Biden will conduct policy with Saudi Arabia with the king. The Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is not the head of government, not the head of state. And President Biden will conduct foreign policy and communications with his counterpart, who's the king, not the deputy, not the Crown Prince. So, he's looking at a new policy regarding Saudi Arabia, but he's also looking at breaking the some of the norms that were established under the last administration. All right, boys and girls, let's move on to a part of the world that we don't cover often enough, and we don't see covered often enough in press, but an important part of the world, and Africa is going to be increasingly important in the world. And we're going to talk about the Sahel and recent news that was made with the French in that region. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, this is a region of Africa that extends from the Atlantic across to the edges of the Horn of Africa. And to get your mind around how big this area is we're talking about, it basically could lay over the distance from the coast of Lisbon on the Atlantic Ocean to Moscow across Europe. So this is a very large piece of territory that we're talking about that has been troubled by Islamic insurgency, and there has been a reaction by the international community to help boost the security and stability of these states in that region, in particular Mali. But we're also talking about countries like Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Niger, parts of Nigeria, and including Chad. So the news recently was Mr. Macron convening a meeting with the G5 Sahel joint group, and his conversations with them regarding the French position in the Sahel. And the G5 Sahel Joint Force is a sub-regional organization established in 2014 as an intergovernmental partnership between Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. And the French have been working with them for quite some time. And what they're trying to do is, one, to combat terrorism, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. Also to contribute to the restoration of the state authority, which has been diminished, and the return of displaced persons and refugees as a result of the political violence going on there, particularly from the Islamic extremist militants in the area. They're also trying to facilitate humanitarian operations and delivery of aid. And Dick, I think you were talking about Germany's role in the area, and Germany in particular is interested in boosting its humanitarian support and contributing aid. But there are other countries that are providing military forces, and you can see some of these units spread out across the Sahel. The G5 Sahel Joint Force is also trying to contribute to the implementation of development strategies that those countries are facilitating. Here's just a quick laydown of the kinds of operations, and these are various multinational and sub-regional efforts. The United Nations created a force called MINUSMA, dealing specifically with Mali, and that stands for the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali. And fortunately, there's no pop quiz at the end because that would be a tough one to come back up with. So we'll just go with MINUSMA. It was established by the UN Security Council in 2013, and its mandate is to provide security in support of the political stabilization of Mali in response to a push by Islamic extremists that were seizing territory in the north of the country. There are 57 countries that contribute with military personnel, including countries in the region like Burkina Faso, Chad, and others, Bangladesh, Senegal, Egypt, Niger, Guinea, Germany, and China. So that's just one of them. And you can see also there the Sahel force. And then Operation Barkhane, the French deployment, currently up to 5,000 troops. And that was the gist of the conversation that President Macron had with the G5 countries. And Barkhane is the French deployment of 5,000 troops. It started in August 2014. Actually, it extended back before that to another operation called Serval. But in 2014, it was transformed into its current composition of about 5,000 soldiers with a budget of about $800 million a year. And the French have lost over 50 of its troops in battles in the region. So the French definitely have blood and treasure invested in the area. In January of this year, there was a conversation. President Emmanuel Macron was talking about withdrawing the French troops to make an adjustment in the military operations in the Sahel. And it was probably based on the fact that the French are looking at the investment of what is now up to over $1 billion in 2020. And the French Ministry of Defense has signaled that it was ready to withdraw troops. But the conversation that Macron just had with the G5 countries in the Sahel, he's backed off of that and has not ruled out withdrawals in the future, but said that there would be no immediate reduction. So this is where we are in Africa with the French commitment to the Sahel. You can see the commitment by the local nations in the area to the security of the region. Again, this all stems back from the Islamists who have moved in to that part of Africa and have been disruptive to the politics, stability. They've kidnapped large numbers of residents, have forced people to flee and become refugees. And you know, as we know, Dick and Breck, this part of the world is challenged even on a good day to be able to provide for its citizens. So the Islamic insurgency in some of these regions has really made it difficult for the governments to provide security and assist their citizens in moving forward.
You know, Pat, the reason the French, of course, are so heavily involved is this is all taking place in what were mostly French colonies before they became independent countries. And, right. You're absolutely right that it's a huge, huge area. I had the pleasure of being able to fly into Timbuktu, which is really, really out there. You have to really want to get there if you would, to go there. It's not on anybody's easy crossroads. And the infrastructure is minimal. So, and I first encountered the word Tuareg, which most people will think, oh, that's a Volkswagen, right? Isn't that a Volkswagen kind of thing? Well, it's also the name of an ethnic people that live around Timbuktu and live in the desert. They're desert nomads, and they have been fiercely anti-French for decades, if not hundreds of years. So there's a lot going on, but all that from Chad to Mali, Mauritania is mostly a huge empty space. Nouakchott is on the coast, but other than that, there's not much in there. So, and I always had an interest in being assigned to Ouagadougou because I really like the name in Burkina Faso. Yeah,
I threw the map up here just so you could say that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So, I mean, N'Djamena in Chad, that's a good French word there. So it's a big area.
Yeah. And, it's Africa is increasingly important to the United States in terms of stability. And not too long ago, we established an Africa command for military deployments. And we didn't touch on it, but the U.S. military has been very active in Niger and other countries in the region with special forces and intelligence and so forth. It's not included in any of these lists here, but we could go into a long dissertation about what the United States is doing in the region as well.
You got me interested, so I whipped up my pad here, and the organization and forces that are part of the MINUSMA, there are dozens of different countries that have sent forces, including Germany, which has the intelligence portfolio for the thing. There's an Irish Army Ranger Wing, right? Netherlands has been there. Portugal has some people. Romania has 4 helicopters that are available to things. Sri Lanka has 250 personnel, right? So this is a United Nations effort. And of course, the United States has some troops there as well, but we don't talk about that much.
Well, we had, there was a big incident about a couple of American soldiers who were killed in Niger a few years back in the early days of the Trump administration. But the presence continues, and it's an increasingly important area, especially in terms of the footprint of Al-Qaeda and these Islamist terrorist groups that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. All right. So that's the Sahel, interesting place, interesting things going on. Now we're going to turn to the World Trade Organization and just a little brief conversation about the new head of the WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and she was just named on Monday and will take charge of the World Trade Organization come March 1st. And this is an interesting development. Dick, you're familiar with these transnational organizations, and Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is the first woman to head the WTO and the first national to come from Africa to head the WTO. So this is a significant event. She was previously a Nigerian economist and former finance minister. She's held a number of posts. She was briefly the foreign minister, and she spent 25 years in the World Bank, rising to the number 2 position as managing director of the World Bank. So she takes charge of the WTO, which is an increasingly important organization as the United States and others try to sort out a lot of these trade and tariff issues, and we'll talk about the WTO in just a minute. But Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is taking the helm of the WTO at a difficult time. The WTO, as you know, is in charge of writing the trade rules, settling disputes, and encouraging the flows of goods and services. But it's been criticized for falling short on a number of these fronts, especially failing to advance new trade negotiations and adequately police unfair trade practices and economic practices from China. So at a time of growing protectionism, as we see tariffs posted, the United States imposing tariffs on European goods and Canadian goods and Chinese goods, the World Trade Organization is seen as challenged to keep up with what's happening in the world. So it's interesting to see a new face there. I'm sure we all wish Dr. Okonjo Iweala well as she takes the helm of the WTO. It's an important organization, and we hope that they play an important part in resolving a lot of these trade issues. Just again, a reminder that what the WTO does. It's the principal international trade organization for developing trade negotiations and settling disputes. One consequence of Dr. Okonjo taking this office has been a surge in popularity for her and the WTO among her fellow Nigerians. There's now trending something called the Ankara Army, and Ankara comes from the word describing the traditional Nigerian distinctive dress. So there is on Twitter a large number of Ankara Army contestants for who can be the best posed in the full outfit of head tie and the African wax cloth known as Ankara, a single strand necklace and clear glasses. So that's something you can look for on your Twitter feed, Breck, as you go through your daily tweets.
Wait,
I will look for that. I definitely will look for that.
You can join the Ankara Army. And
can I just give a shout out to one of my favorite programs? Christian Amanpour is an Iranian descent, but grew up in the UK and was a very well-known international correspondent for a number of years. She has a talk program. Some of you out there may have actually heard of a guy named Charlie Rose, who was on PBS for a number of years, who got in trouble. And then so they pulled him off. But Christian Amanpour has a discussion. It's on PBS 2 here in Nashville. And she had your new head of the WTO in discussion about 3 or 4 days ago. And she had 2 other ladies with her. One was Carmen Lawrence, who was the Prime Minister of Australia, and a young lady named Voisa Osmani, who is running for Prime Minister of Kosovo. And their basic discussion was women in politics and how more women ought to really get involved. So it was an interesting discussion. And I recommend Amanpour and Company on PBS 2 if it's on in the evenings, but you can DVR it so you can watch it whenever you want.
All right. Yep. I catch that once in a while. She is an exceptional journalist, has walked the walk before talking the talk.
Yep.
We have a question from Robert who asks about the French investment in the Sahel. Is it the same as the French Foreign Legion? And I think the French Foreign Legion was most notably in North Africa, Algeria, and so forth. Dick, are you familiar with the French Foreign Legion?
Yeah, they were all around. And part of the thing with the French Foreign Legion is they would take it was a multinational force. You did not have to be a French citizen in order to serve in it. And it was not a draft, it was a volunteer organization. But all of the French colonies, of which there were many in Africa, relied on that French Foreign Legion force to put down rebellions and keep order, as well as to train local military and police forces.
Yeah, and I think the forces, the 5,000 in the Sahel countries are the standing French army forces, not necessarily foreign legionnaires. Robert also mentions that his concern about our perception of President Trump, suggesting it might be appropriate to have somebody taking the Trump position on some of these issues. I think what we've discussed here in terms of the Trump administration's foreign policy is an assessment of policy. The World Affairs Council is a nonpartisan organization, and we try not to criticize this or that politician based on personal prerequisites, but we do provide analysis and commentary on foreign policy and based on our personal experiences, and what we say here is our personal point of view. But we will take that aboard, Robert, to try to invite guest panelists who might provide a broader conversation. And I think we've had some guests in the past who have been on the other side of the aisle in terms of assessments of foreign policy. But we try to be objective in what we're talking about in terms of the U.S. position on some of these things in the world. Steve Musick asks, what are the U.S. domestic policy imperative policies that could boost relations with the EU? Breck, I think this goes back to your conversation about obstacles for Biden's foreign policy and this transatlantic relationship that everybody thought was going to be sweet kisses, and now we're looking at kind of a rocky road.
Well, I think that's right. And Dick mentioned, I think that probably the biggest single issue where the U.S. could make a big impression, well, two, NATO is one, but certainly climate change is the other one. I think that the Western European nations are absolutely solid on wanting to do something substantive for climate change, and I think that they very much want to see the U.S. in that. The other thing I think is that I think the Europeans would, right now, I think the West Europeans look at the Biden administration without a lot of confidence that there's going to be consistency in United States foreign policies from one administration to the next. And the shifts in policies, regardless of what you think about those policies, the last 5 years have been breathtaking. Or I guess the last, actually, from Obama to Trump and then from Trump to Biden, they've been breathtaking. And probably most foreign policy experts, apart from the policies themselves, think that rapid shifts from one direction to another are not don't serve the United States well, because we've become perceived as unreliable when we're signing treaties or entering into agreements or whatever we might be doing. And anyway, I don't know what to do about that, but I think it's a worrisome aspect when Europe is looking at us.
Well, that's especially obvious when you look at the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranians say, hey, why should we be so quick to jump back into compliance? And they stayed in compliance for quite some time after the United States, the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA. And one of the arguments is, in 4 years, you might have another administration that does something totally different and cancels the agreement again. So, the reliability is an issue in that's part of our democracy, is that you win the election, you write the rules, but it does make it difficult in foreign policy. Dick, any recollections from your career as a foreign service officer about transitions in administrations that made foreign policy continuity difficult?
Well, for most of my career, I mean, the cardinal rule that domestic bickering in politics stops at the water's edge was the rule. There was a big shift with the Vietnam War how it came to an end. Clinton came in as also, he had a rather different relationship with the U.S. military than his predecessors had. By and large, for most of my career, the principles that we had were shared by both sides of the aisle. And it's only been in recent years that the real bickering has started. So it's a different world we're living in now. And I think your point about trust is spot on, Pat. I mean, if I were a European or an Asian country or an African country, I would really kind of be hedging my bets about how much we could count on the United States in the long run for some of these things. So it's up to us to get our act together and change the way we do things. Otherwise, we're not going to have the influence we once had in the world, for better or worse.
Well, look at TPP 4 years ago.
Yeah.
A dozen or so countries that had negotiated in good faith with the United States for the TPP saw the election come and wipe that away.
Well, so, we have tariffs slapped on all sorts of people, like in Europe. I mean, wait a minute, why are we playing that tit for tat tariff game with the Europeans?
Yeah, and the Canadians. Well, getting back to Steve's question on the domestic imperatives, I think the main transatlantic issues are issues like NATO and restoring the alliance to a position where our allies aren't questioning whether the U.S. believes in what is it, Article 5, that attack on one is an attack on all. So we have the defense and national security issues with the Europeans. In terms of domestic policy, I would say, a stretch would be, you talked about climate change. That's both a domestic and a global issue, and the Europeans are certainly concerned about that. But perhaps also, as you talked about, these tariffs that are placed on certain things, and I know the Germans have been sensitive to the potential tariffs on automobiles, which is curious because they build so many of them here. We have Volkswagen in Tennessee and BMW and Mercedes in the Southeast. So, domestic imperatives are probably just to restore solid trading relationships and get past these tariffs. And we're still waiting to see the Brexit implications for relationships.
What's the UK going to do?
Yeah, trade agreement.
Interestingly, for example, the Hungarians have basically given up on getting vaccines from the European Union, and they've cut a deal with China. So they are now using Chinese vaccine to immunize the Hungarians from COVID.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the questions, everyone. And we will move along here. Breck, do you want to take us out with the question of the week?
Absolutely, Pat. So the question of the week was: the leader of this country, head of the nationalist BJP, has pushed to change school curricula to downplay the country's secular roots, which reflect the country's founders' goals to promote peace between majority Hindus and the sizable Muslim minority and other religious communities. And the answer is B, India.
All right.
Hey, Pat, if you, for 1 second, I just want to give a shout out too. We were talking about Jessica Tuckman Matthews, and as a historian, her mother was a Pulitzer Prize winning, relatively popular historian by the name of Barbara Tuckman, who wrote books such as The Guns of August and The Distant Mirror and The Proud Tower. And for those listeners who are looking for a good history book, and those are books across medieval France, World War I. She wrote about modern warfare in the post, well, I guess she wrote a book on modern warfare. Anyway, look, she is a very good writer. And for listeners who are looking for a history book to read, perusing some of her works would be a good thing. And she died back in 1989, but she is a timeless writer, in my opinion, Barbara Tuckman.
For sure. And I think The Guns of August is the book.
It's classic.
And it has given rise to that metaphor, the Guns of August, that people use that now to talk about any incipient conflict that's about to emerge. Here we are at a Guns of August moment. You're exactly right. But Dr. Jessica Matthews, I would highly recommend people take a listen to her and General Allen. And the other in the series that focused on America's place in the world was with Ambassador Thomas Pickering and Ambassador John Kornblum. They too had a 1-hour session with us and talked about America's place in the world. And both of those are really worth a listen. You can catch those either on the youtube.com/TNWAC channel or anywhere you get podcasts. And that's under the Global Tennessee Podcast brand, or you can find it exactly on soundcloud.com/TNWAC. Last thing, just a reminder, please become a member of the World Affairs Council so we can pay the soundcloud.com bill every month and continue to provide archives for all these wonderful programs and to pay the light bill over there at Ambassador Bowers' place so he's not in the cold and dark. Otherwise, everybody stay warm. Thanks for watching the program today. We will be back next week at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Take a look at our calendar. We'll be updating that today with some of these great programs we have coming. And we do have waiting in the wings, a special guest that we'll be announcing shortly for an episode of Global Nashville with Carl Dean. That's it for today. Gentlemen, thank you once again. And
thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
Have a great week.
Stay warm.
Good to see you.